Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Scottish Rugby podcast brought to you by the Scottish Rugby blog. I am Cammy Black. Johnny.
Yes.
I said you could have 2 minutes later on. Johnny, for listeners at home, Johnny was holding up our Fife logo to the camera. We'll come on to that later. Anyway, it's a special podcast tonight because it's yesterday, as we record this, that was Wednesday, was the 5th year, officially 5 years of the podcast. So we're going to do a bit of a celebration tonight. We're going to look back at 5 years of rugby in Scotland and some of the influences we've had on that. We'll then do a Patreon special where we're going to look back at 5 years across the whole of rugby, as well as the podcast itself, and have a bit of an indulge there because, to be quite honest, and for reasons we'll discuss in the Patreon podcast, regular listeners, not our patrons, don't enjoy our buffoonery sometimes. So,
buffoonery, that's such a strong word. Honestly.
Well, I don't know.
That's total rhubarb.
Maybe, do you know, we'll ask Johnny. Johnny's one of the newer member to the pod. We'll ask him what he thinks of some of the clips I've got later on in the Patreon section.
I can only imagine.
Yeah.
I think some of my favourites might be in there.
Yeah. So anyway, if you want to sign up for our Patreon, it's patreon.com/Scottish Rugby Podcast. For £3 per month, you get access to weekly bonus content now. So we do this main podcast for everybody. If you pay £3 a month, you get the main podcast advert free. Plus, then you get another hour of bonus content as well, where we kind of a bit more freer, a little bit more of a chit chat, less focused, maybe. Some more buffoonery.
Drunker.
Yeah. That's very true, Ian. We are drunker, and also we swear. I should just put that word of note in there that there is swearing in the Patreon one. That's what you get for your money. Anyway, joining me on this trip down memory lane, I'm pleased we haven't got Craig Manson with us. He's going to have to talk to me.
You're pleased you don't have Craig Manson. That's literally just what you just said.
He's got a good reason, though.
I've got a good reason, because for reasons that we'll come on to. We have, though, got Ian here. Good evening, Ian.
Hello, happy Wood anniversary, as Roderick Mackay points out.
Is it Wood?
Yes, I just looked it up while the theme tune was on. So yes, we've got Wood.
Not Keith Wood and his pregnancy. His pregnancy fetish that he revealed on the 97 Lions to a DVD.
So grim, wasn't it? That was
Really
so grim.
We've also got John Anderson. You can hear there. Good evening, John.
Yeah. My dulcet tones are joining us tonight. Hi, folks. Hi, everyone. Welcome along to our big birthday.
Yeah, and we've got Johnny McGinty. Johnny, look, Craig's not here, and I'm really pleased because you can't double down on this, but. You can have some time at the start of the podcast to talk about what happened at the weekend.
I'm tempted to wait until he is here because I feel a bit sorry for him that he's missing out. But no, very pleased.
Sure when he joins us in the Patreon bit, he'll have his digs.
Very pleased for the How firsts who I was going to say eased to a demolition, scraped a very close win against Berwick at the weekend. By all accounts, I was speaking to some of the boys through the week, and they said it was a really good game. Close game, obviously. It was a close game in Berwick as well, but pretty big win for us, I think, and keeps it tight at the top of the table. So we'll see what happens for the next few weeks.
Yep. So that's it. So it's we're one apiece then for the podcast derbies this year. So
hopefully next year we'll manage to get to one if we end up in the same.
I know that would be good. We will try and get to one. If obviously it'll be disappointing when Berwick get promoted and how don't. That won't happen, but we'll see.
How many points are last week ahead?
I don't know, miles. I don't know who's catching them. I think Berwick got loads of games in hand though, but we haven't played for 2 months pretty much because of COVID. So we'll see. Anyway, there's that. At least, it's a shame nobody filmed the game because when Berwick won, somebody filmed the entire game and I made Craig sit for 20 minutes and analyse it with me on the podcast.
If I'd remembered that it was on before the night before, I might have asked someone to film it for us. But I don't know. It slipped my mind.
Well, there we go.
I think it's important to note, Johnny, see when I'm hosting, you don't have to put up with this. We don't have this. So Cammy's, obviously put up with your putting the programme up. I would have literally just kicked you out. I mean, how many times did I kick Craig out for all sorts of nonsense? Just kept removing him from the stream.
The
Go away.
problem is everybody's got admin privileges now.
I
on the
know,
stream, so it's
right?
just
Yeah,
utter
I'll just
chaos.
come back.
It's like literally, it's like the Cold War now. Nobody dare take the first move because it'd be utter devastation on the live stream.
So like that in my day.
Mutually assured podcast destruction.
Yeah. Listen, look, we were going to have a brief chat about Europe, but Craig's not here, and it's a bit like when a tree falls in a wood. Does anybody hear it? If the Embra game isn't broadcast live on TV, did it really happen? Craig was there live. He could have confirmed that for us, but he's not here. Just like the big news from the weekend was the fact that Flinty McStag is apparently back.
Returned.
Yeah.
That is not Flinty McStag. An utter joke that they think that we'll just accept a brand new mascot with a whole new costume. They haven't even bothered to try and replicate him. I want to know where Flinty is. Where is Flinty? This is the big conspiracy. And if the Embra social media guys think that I'm letting this drop, they've got another thing coming. They don't know me.
They should have just fully heel turned and called the new one Tommy McHawk or something.
I know that would have been fine. But yeah, ludicrous. If anybody knows of what has happened to the real Flinty, then get in touch. Anonymity will be assured.
Hashtag where's Flinty?
Where's Flinty? Yep.
Is this like Where's Dougie Donnelly, but with an Edinburgh mascot now?
It's significantly easier to spot.
People found Dougie Donnelly though for us. Somebody found him carrying a bag for life in Sainsbury's car park. It's fine, but nobody knows where Flinty is.
I can sadly confirm due to correspondence, because apparently now I'm a target for the cult on Twitter, so I can confirm via correspondence that in fact I was the reason Edinburgh won so significantly. It was my motivational talk. So you're welcome. Basically.
See what influence this podcast continues to wield over the world of Scottish rugby. That John Anderson, you and our millions of listeners.
You're talking about. They're coached by a British and Irish Lion. You've got world class rugby brains there. But obviously, what they needed was this guy to talk.
Mike Blair's just there with a live stream up in the team room. Look at this joker, boys. This is what he thinks of you. Go up there, prove this man who's sat in his his dining room on a Wednesday night.
He's just been non-committal about how good you are. Now you go out and show that part-time French team how good you really are.
Oh, there we go.
Do you want to just timestamp that, Cammy, so we can send it to Craig?
He'll listen back. We'll all be sat minding our own business tomorrow, I reckon, about 9:30, and all of a sudden the group chat will light up as Craig listens back to the first part of the podcast.
Oh,
I wouldn't be surprised if his under-18s have gone fully feral and he's just sitting watching the live stream, to be honest. just do that again. Whatever you're doing, do it again. I'm busy.
I can't believe what these boys are saying.
Honestly.
Do you want to talk about Glasgow?
Not really.
No. Should we just move on?
Yep.
No, I mean, let's not talk about Glasgow.
You're not in a real competition now, John.
Well, do you know, that was the question that was posed to me. If Glasgow do move to the Diddy Cup, does that no longer make it the Diddy Cup? And do you know, the great thing about being right about it being a Diddy Cup is I continue to be right despite the fact Glasgow are there. So it's now, and actually it's like, it's like a Diddy Cup that we didn't even need to qualify for. That's how Diddy it is. So, it's no real cup.
Yeah. So anyway, we'll move on from that. We're not going to dwell on Glasgow. We none of us were. We've seen that. I've seen the Embra highlights. They looked fine. As Johnny said, they looked as good as I would expect them to be against that opposition. And I thought the young lads took the chance as well. So there you go, Embra fans. I've analysed the match that I was able to watch. Anyway,
is anyone going to pay a $5 to watch Glasgow? Because I don't think I'm going to bother.
You're giving your money to European rugby, though. Is it right? Give your money to European rugby. You're giving your money to Dublin. It. You basically like funding Irish rugby, as far as I can tell.
Paying for Johnny Sexton's new boots.
Well, that's it. He looks like what I expected Johnny Sexton to look like if you put him through one of those app generators that make him look like an old man. He just looks like that now. He's got the wrinkles and the grey hair.
It sort of reminds me of, like when all the characters came back in the Force Awakens, the new Star Wars movie, and they brought back all the OG characters, and it's like, oh wow, they all got really old. It's basically like that. So it's Sexton is the Force Awakens of Six Nations Rugby.
He looks like he's had work done as well.
He does, yeah. His hair was looking pretty svelte. Like, obviously in Scottish Rugby, we're big fans of a reconfigured hairdo. So it was good to see, taking care of himself.
Interesting to know if it's full plugs or whether or not it's one of those pens that Tim from that Channel 4 breakfast show is hawking on Facebook at the minute, where you draw your hair on your head, as far as I can tell.
I think I'm going to go full. I think it's proper wig. I think he's actually just sporting a wig. And, like, I wouldn't be surprised to see him wearing a scrum cap.
Well, there we go. I mean, it would, that would be a sight to behold. Anyway.
Everyone that talks about how one-eyed we are, by the way, is going to be thrilled that we just decided to completely ignore Glasgow getting battered to talk about Sexton's hairline instead.
Glasgow were crap. There you go.
Yeah.
Glasgow were crap.
There's not really a lot more you can say.
Marshall left 7 tries on the park and should have absolutely scalped Glasgow. There you go.
And we've there's nothing we haven't talked about in the last few weeks about Glasgow's problems that we wouldn't just be repeating. So go back and listen to last week's podcast. I think we had a good go over it. Said the same thing.
Probably 2 weeks before that as well. And
yeah. So what we should do is we should just kind of like, if we were organised, we could just you could just clip yourselves analysing Glasgow's defence and how bad it is, and we'll just play it every week as almost like a jingle.
I mean, you could also, like, if you really are desperate to hear my views on Glasgow, do feel free to go over to Scrum of the Earth, because I am in depth giving Glasgow a slapping on there.
Anyway, look, let's actually move on from this, because I said we'd move on about 3 minutes ago, and somehow we've analysed the Glasgow game.
It's poor chairmanship. Come on.
I know. Well, there we go. Look, we're going to look back now at the last 5 years of Scottish rugby. This is going to be lots of fun, I think, because there were lots of things I hadn't remembered about the last 5 years, which, given that we've done a podcast pretty much every week for the last 5 years, surprised me. And I don't know if it's because I've spent too much time talking about Scottish rugby that it's all a blur, or whether or not I've got memory, early onset memory issues that I need to get checked out. We'll find out through the podcast, which it is. We started back in 2017. Vern Cotter was still in charge, although he was in his last. We knew he was going at that point because Gregor Townsend was taking over. The first game we covered was the Ireland game, where we won 27-22, which felt like quite a monumental. That felt like a monumental win. That game.
Yeah, So that's the famous Greig Laidlaw pose game, isn't it?
Pose game, yeah.
Nails his kick and just Rugby Jesus pose. Yeah, was Jim Hamilton at his destructive best during that game?
No, so it's interesting to look at the first team that we would cover. I thought, we'll look at the first one, look at the most recent, because it's interesting to compare where we've gone. So you've got, going from back to front, you've got Hogg, Maitland, Hugh Jones, then you've got Alec Dunbar, Tommy Seymour, Finn Russell, Greg Laidlaw. Then in the scrum, you've got Alan Dell, Fraser Brown, Xander Ferguson, Richie Gray and Johnny Gray, Ryan Wilson, Hamish Watson and Josh Strauss. On the bench, Ross Ford, Gordy Reid, Simon Bergen, Tim Swinson, John Barkley, Ali Price, Duncan Weir, and Mark Bennett.
Mate, that bench gives you the fear, though, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
If only we weren't still using most of that same bench for Glasgow this weekend.
Pretty sure John Barkley could still get a game for us as well. Yeah. It's really interesting, because actually when you were going through those names, Cammy, a lot of those still, obviously, 5 years is a long time in professional sport, and actually to see the amount of names that are still settled, or I guess with a couple of exceptions, if they were to name that starting 15 tomorrow, you wouldn't be completely devastated, obviously swapping out those that have retired. Yeah.
I was surprised at the longevity of some of the players that are in there. Particularly Xander. I don't know why. I mean, that's 5 years of Zandbags.
He must have only been 19 or 20.
I think it must have been second
Yeah, it was one
season
of his
because
very
I
first
think.
caps, I think.
Well, didn't he got capped? I think his first cap was 2016 Calcutta Cup because I was
He got
I
capped
was
at
there.
18. His
Yeah.
debut was at 18. So
At that was the Calcutta Cup in 2016. So it's his first full Six Nations. This.
So 19 going on 20.
Yeah.
Jeez. For a tight head prop.
Just a baby.
That's it. And he was putting his copious frame about the place, fighting with everybody that would look at him.
No, I remember they went to Spider-Cam and Paul O'Connell was pointing out that Ireland were boring in on him and it was just bad refereeing because they were just bullying the young boy. Shocking.
Yeah,
Who was the referee that day?
The referee that day was no TMO, just vibes. It's Roman Platt.
Oh no!
There we go.
There we go.
Oh, Roman.
The defence rests.
But I think the thing is that Scotland won that game, and then we beat Wales in 2017 and Italy, which we'll get. I want to get onto that in a minute. That Italy game.
Wales was the game that me and Rory were at.
Was that?
Was that the game you covered that? Because one of our was that the game that you saw Warren Gatland at?
Yes, yeah, he was just down from us, and he had a face like fizz on him.
He looked at you. I think we called the podcast at the time Midlife Gatland because he had that little scrawny beard on him at the time. It looked like he was having a midlife crisis.
He was on his year sabbatical to go and pick the Lions for like the 18th time, and he was watching the game. He genuinely looked absolutely furious with the result, and obviously me and Rory are going bonkers up in the press box, and Gats is just he's not having none of it. It was that was a proper midlife crisis from him actually.
It was, yeah. But that 2017 Six Nations, Johnny, felt like the start. When you look back at it now, it really felt like the start of something. Although it was the end of the kind of Vern Cotter era and Townsend was kind of taking over, actually, look back at Scotland haven't done badly since then.
No, yeah. It was, I think we kind of started to see, certainly going forward, the Scotland that we still see and that we kind of got quite used to enjoying seeing, because it wasn't always pleasant to watch up until sort of 2015, 2016 was when it kind of started to develop, and then it really hit its stride in 2017 and has mostly, the Scotland attack stayed like that, basically from that Six Nations onwards. So, yeah, I think there's a couple of really enjoyable games that year.
Yeah. And what about you, Ian? I mean, you kind of see that as the start of things for this Scotland team?
Well, you've got the 2015 World Cup when we were so close to the semi-final. I suppose that was like when Finn Russell had his first big introduction onto the world stage. Same with Hogg in that. So how did we do in the 2016 Six Nations?
Badly. That was the did we get the wooden spoon that year? In fact,
let's find out.
No, I think we were
last. We did in 2015.
We were second to. I think we were second to last because Italy beat us in the last game. But I think we'd beaten somebody else that year.
Right. So I suppose that was the start, and then, but it was inconsistency. Then I think from 2017 we've been more consistent. We've not been getting scalped. Really by anyone, whereas 61-21 and whatnot. 2019 World Cup we were dreadful, but since then I think those issues have been ratified. Townsend just discovered that he has to be a bit more pragmatic, and I think recent results show that we're on the right path, and also we have Doohan now, so. There we go.
Well, whether we do or do not have Doohan may depend on whether he was on holiday or ill. The I mean, looking at it, I've just gone through Jonathan's. How did we do? Did you get fine 2016, John?
So 2016 2016 was the year we gave Italy a bit of a going over, and we also scalped France, and we finished in 4th.
So actually, I mean, even
what was that, the Duncan Taylor one?
It was the Visser, the Stuart Hogg over the head one.
Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah, and Taylor scored like he took a quick
tap. From a breakdown penalty, he won the breakdown penalty and just went.
I think Seymour won it.
So actually, I mean, that's 6 years then when Scotland haven't won the wooden spoon for over 6 years now, which, given we were regular, kind of was us or Italy for the best part of a decade, that's a fairly strong upward trajectory. I think there's 1 year I've just scrolled through it. 1 year we got fifth, but mostly it's third and fourth every year.
Is this the best that we can hope for? Not being wooden spoon contenders. Come on, Cammy.
Well, I know, but it feels like progress, given that, because before the podcast, like, I was writing for the blog, and honestly, like, trying to find anything positive pre 2015 was a slog. There was one. I mean, Vern came in and there was that victory against Argentina, which even then we still almost managed to mess up by letting them back in the last 10 minutes.
And Rob Harley getting the most ridiculous yellow card you've ever seen.
Yeah,
I was at that game and was just desperately excited because it was the first Scotland game I'd went to in ages, and I was like, "This is what Scotland do now. We score tries like mad people and concede points like mad people. This is great."
I had a Facebook memory the other day of. Do you remember when we scored 3 tries past the All Blacks, but they still somehow they absolutely mullered us?
Was that when Visser scored 2?
Yeah, I was absolutely made up that day because we scored 3 tries past the All Blacks. So that was amazing. There was a video of me singing "Simply the Best" drunk in a German beer market afterwards because I was so excited. But that's what I mean, John. That was literally the most exciting thing that had happened in Scottish rugby was we'd scored some tries past the All Blacks, even though they'd beaten us. But now, and I think this is probably where the change that's been in the podcast is that we expect more from Scotland now than we did when we first set out on this.
I think I expect more from Scotland now than I probably ever have since I would have been 14, 1999. So since I was like a rugby watching adult, this is the most I've expected of Scotland.
Since the Six Nations began.
It was pretty bleak for a really long time. Like, there's no getting away from it.
Yeah. But then also, though, that 2017 Six Nations was the year that we got absolutely scalped by England down at Twickenham.
A lot of mitigating factors. Matthew Ryan being one of them.
Well, that's true. And also we got Ali Price ended up on the wing.
Mm-hmm. Seymour and Hogg both off with concussions.
Mario Itoje absolutely smashed Stuart Hogg in that game and should have been yellow carded.
And it was a proper, he left the elbow in just to make sure that it was pretty dreadful, actually.
And I reacted by giving everyone 0 out of 10.
You did!
In the match ratings.
apart from the recently retired
Gordy Reid. Gordy Reid got 5 out of 10 for his try.
Hugh Jones I think you gave Hugh Jones 2, didn't you?
2 because he scored a try. And Ali Price got 5 out of 10 for effort on the wing. Everybody else got 0.
Oh, yeah.
But I think at that point, that was probably the turning point in the match ratings on the blog. It just felt pointless trying to give anybody match ratings in a game we'd lost so badly.
Yeah. I mean, it was. I remember it was the optimism. That was, again, back to our point about Scottish rugby and the optimism killing you. It was because we had the chance of winning the tournament going down there, or I believe were we still in the tournament?
What did the opening 5 minutes of that game? I think about roughly the opening 5 minutes of that
Fraser
game.
Brown got yellow carded.
And of this weekend.
This weekend, Fraser Brown. 5 years later, the same day.
Never learned.
I remember because I was watching the game and I was due to go on a night out, and I think we did leave early to go out. And I ended up at the Solid in Glasgow, and then ended up with pneumonia. So basically nothing's changed.
What a day!
Well, I mean, if the shoe fits.
I think we can't. I think we may have been on as an outside chance. We'd already been beaten by France in 2017 away.
Was it going to take some ridiculous turn of results, like we'd have to scalp England and then hope that France beat Wales by X amount?
Yeah,
I seem to remember us going down though, and I remember this from the Wales Millennium Stadium game where Harris played at 12. We went down with that same stupid optimism that the press were building us up, and I seem to remember Ali Price talking to the press, and it was just like we went down there believing we could win, but we all thought we could win, but they didn't.
Yeah, I mean the thing is though that if you look at the final table, we were fourth, but we were actually joint second because from second to fourth, everyone had 14 points,
Yeah.
and then England got 19. So if we had beaten England, then we would have won the championship.
And that was the first year, of course, of the bonus points as well.
Yeah.
So,
but I think that's the one thing that makes me think because for a couple of years afterwards, the constant chat we had, I think, was did the SIU go too early with Gregor Townsend? Should they have given Vern the Tuesday? Should we talk about the Tuesday? Should we talk about the Tuesday clock?
Clock? Yeah.
Because that was the whole thing with the Tuesday clock, of course, was like, did Scotland jump the gun when Gregor Townsend basically said, I'm going overseas to coach, whether it was going to be England or France. I'm leaving Glasgow. I'd like the Scotland job, but if you're not going to give it to me, I'm off ski. And then the SIU were like, oh, we can't lose the most promising young coach we've had in many a decade. Let's just terminate Vern Cotter's contract, even though he's doing not too bad and he's nearly taken us to a World Cup semi-final. On reflection, Johnny, did the SIU make the right choice, do you think, given where we are now?
Yeah, I mean, given that he's a British and Irish Lions coach now, you can't really argue too much with it. And there's also, I think, kind of small bits and pieces have come out since then that possibly the Scottish dressing room with Vern was not the happiest place in the world. And so that very rarely gets better once it's started. I can't see it if there was players that were starting to not take well to Vern. Very rarely does that happen, and then all of a sudden he wins everyone back round. So I think that if that was true, it was only going to get worse. So probably right to move him when they did, then let it get worse.
Having said that, John, the reason we came up, did we come up with the Tuesday clock before Finn Russell was kicked out?
No, I think it was
as a result of it.
I think it was
2020 Six Nations, I'm pretty sure.
No, it was the 20, but it was the same year. That's the thing. That's what I'm thinking though, because it was the year we came up with it after the World Cup.
It was because of the World Cup. I'm fairly sure the idea was first bandied around on our group chat after that ridiculous game against Ireland, where we again all went in with desperate optimism, knew we were going to beat them, and got pumped.
Cuffed.
Yeah.
So yeah, the Tuesday clock was out. Like that was, I think there'll be a common theme comes out across like our analysis of the 5 years. Like obviously, there's been lots of different segments, and Cammie's obviously been absolutely like a driving force behind some of the more creative items that we've looked at over the years. And a lot of them have polarized opinion. And the Tuesday clock was one that we got a lot of feedback at the time about how crass it was and how
it was a really good pun. Look, that you can't waste a good pun like that.
It was a cracking pun. And again, I actually mentioned it on another podcast and they were just like, that's class. So, you know, you can't please everyone, I suppose, is the mantra for 5 years.
But I think that's it. And Alan McDonald's on the comments. He's just made a good point. He says, things weren't the happiest with Scotland after the 2019 World Cup, and Townsend seems to have listened. And that was a big turning point because we started that Six Nations in 2019 talking about the fact that this was Townsend's last big chance to turn things around. 2020 Six Nations, the last chance to turn things around. And after the Ireland game and everything, Finn Russell, like, he's definitely going to go at the end of the tournament. But actually, when we got, to be fair, we're nothing if not willing, open-minded on this podcast, because I remember our review of that Six Nations when it eventually finished because of coronavirus was, do you know what? It wasn't as bad as it seemed at the start. The Ireland game was a lot closer, I think, than we'd realised. We actually beat Wales away, albeit it was played in November or whenever it was.
In
a gale.
Yeah.
In an empty stadium. Not that I want to caveat the victory or anything, but
yeah, we'd lost to England, but again, albeit at Murrayfield, but albeit on a horrible, nasty
in a gale
day.
And then some.
Yes, very narrowly. That
2020 championship was actually, and we talked about, was 2020 Steve Tandy's first championship with us? because that was a turning point. So actually, we talked in 2019. We'd obviously up to 2019. So almost this podcast's lifespan has the fastest brand of rugby in the world trademark, kind of precursor to that, and then it has the post, almost like, let's call it the Hugh Jones era and the Chris Harris era, if we will. They're the front end of these series. And
the post Matt Taylor era.
Well, the 2020 Six Nations was the one we didn't lose any of the games we lost by 7 points or less, and that has continued. 2021, we were 4 points away from the championship. Not 4 points on the table, 4 in-game points. That's like how.
And we should have had a penalty against Wales.
Yes. Potato. I like
Bloody Williams.
But that was a turning point for us. Being able to defend, we were always so exciting in attack in those first few years up to that World Cup. And even the game against Japan where they tore us to shreds, we still scored some bloody good tries that day. And we looked good in attack. And it's like there had to be something had to give. We either concede 30 points a game and lose games, but score 27 points, or you have to dial things back a wee bit. And we're still exciting, but we can actually defend now, which is great.
Yeah.
I felt a lot less since Tandy and Harris came along. A lot less like we could lose any game that we're winning.
Yeah.
Up until like 2019, like even through the World Cup, especially through the World Cup, we could have been winning games at any point and been sat there thinking we could lose this, no bother. Whereas now we've got Tandy and Harris.
That's the more game that we nilled them in the World Cup, and I kept watching, going, they're going to get a breakaway try. We're going to switch off in a minute, and they're going to come back into this.
Yeah, and those two have been the difference. Tandy and Harris are the difference, I think.
Remember the Samoa game from the previous World Cup?
Which a point.
How was that? You were there, weren't you? And I think we were both not together, but we were there separately.
Newcastle.
And then the was it 2017 Autumn Series where we gave away? I think it was Chris Harris' debut.
It was Chris Harris' debut,
yeah.
We gave away 3 tries in like the last 5 minutes or something.
Yeah, every time we scored, we just let them score straight away. But then we went and nilled them. Although maybe it's partly due to Samoa's players dropping off. It's getting on a bit. But we're doing all right.
I think we can talk a lot about that, and we will talk, obviously, as we go through this, about the impact of certain players, on this Scotland squad. And certainly, I think prior to, we've obviously mentioned Finn Russell already. I think almost his influence in shaping the way Scotland played from his debut in 2014 through to his exile was really important. But actually, if you're talking about the defining character of Scottish rugby in the last 5 years, it is Chris Harris. Like, it's the rags to riches story of a guy who's been pillared by Scottish fans, including ourselves. Every one of us here is guilty of having criticised him, and I have no shame in that, because we were commenting on what was in front of us. Little did we know Townsend was playing like 18D chess with Harris.
That 2018 Wales game was utterly ridiculous.
It was terrible. It was terrible. It was so
bad.
I remember clear as day that I either tweeted or put on Facebook after that 2018 game, the Scotland bus should stop in Newcastle to let Chris Harris off on the way home and never pick him up again. And had to rapidly eat my words by the time we got round to the 2026 Nations. And then made money off him getting picked for the Lions.
There you go. Alan McDonald says Chris Harris gave Bruce Dillon PTSD so bad he panicked and forgot he should kick the game into touch in the last France game. That is absolutely true.
I'll tell you what I think was a big turning point game for Chris Harris was a game me and you were at, Cammy, again separately, but we did meet for the first time. That France game on that scorching hot day.
Yeah.
He scored a try, but also looked.
That's the World Cup warm up.
Yeah. Because I mean, someone said so what do you think after that game? What's sum that up in game up in 5 words? It's like Harris is on the plane. He was phenomenal that day.
It was interesting, wasn't it? Because he was a player, and we've had players like this in the past. And again, it just shows probably from our perspective, how you do get caught up in the characters and the kind of the rush of the fans quite often as well, because obviously we're all rugby fans first and foremost, and you get caught in the kind of the wave of that. And it was the same when Duncan Taylor made his Scotland debut, and I always kind of reference that as being like an example of where a guy was rubbish on his debut and rubbish on like his first 5, almost 6, 7 caps. And then was all of a sudden we were like, well, he's the best player in the world ever. He's amazing. Super dunk, whoop, whoop. So, judging a guy so early, Harris took his time to find his feet, but, maybe these professional coaches know what they're talking about. Maybe, just maybe.
Maybe, but then that'd make the podcast really dull if every
Oh,
week
no,
we
we're still going to.
Make us redundant.
Welcome to the Scottish Rugby Podcast. In Toonie we trust. See you next week, guys.
We are still going to criticise and argue, and we know that the SRU have to listen, so it makes it all the more fun. Just to do that.
What if kind of we go back then, and Johnny, what's your kind of big memory of the last 5 years with Scotland?
Highlight.
Well, just a memory. What sticks in your mind?
Greg and Finn steaming with their ties around their heads.
Yeah.
I honestly don't think it's close. I think that's the thing I think about most over the last.
It's a defining image of Scottish rugby.
It really is. Yeah. But just it's the whole video though, because it's not just those two is the most famous bit, obviously.
Yeah.
But like Hastings, just with his big toothy smile.
Because that was he wasn't even in the squad that day. I think he was just there on the lash with them afterwards. And it's that, like you said, it's the interesting thing of that. Like we've talked about this recently. He's not the second coming of Finn or the replacement, but he's an up and coming player in the squad, and he's there in that clip.
Yeah, brilliant. It's just great. I love it.
Hugh Jones looking slightly uncomfortable.
Yeah.
What about you, John?
Yeah, I think that day as a whole actually was like a real stat. Obviously, let's talk the pass. Just probably my most watched internet clip, maybe second most. But yeah, probably the safest for work video clip that I play regularly. And even then, it's debatable. No, the pass. Finn Russell just at his absolute best, and I think. Well, I say best. I think he's a better player. He is a better player now. He's a much, much better player now. But that caught everyone's attention, and it was like, oh wait, this guy can play a bit. And we're all sitting here having watched him for 5 years. 7 years actually at this point, going, yeah, he can do this anytime he wants. He has got those skills, but just beautiful.
Well, there's that photo from that game, isn't there, of Finn throwing, I don't think it's the pass, but a pass, with Owen Farrell just looking absolutely kind of like agog.
You've got it in the credits in the way through.
Yeah. It's a marvellous photo.
It's a marvellous photo. Even more like Jalabear's dog than usual.
And Finn just looks so chill, just like, it's nothing. I'm just launching one off.
I don't know. Did Hugh Jones ever recover from that game, Ian? Genuinely.
Well, he was okay, but the Cardiff game.
The Calcutta Cup game. That 2018. That's kind of for me. That from my memory, that's the peak of Hugh Jones' Scotland career. Someone's going to come back and tell me another game he played a blinder, and I'm sure he probably did. But that for me is the. After that, it just didn't kick on.
Maybe not. I mean, how can you kick on from a almost peerless performance like that? There's obviously shortly after that form issues when he went to Glasgow. He just got overplayed. Sorry, Ronan's just spotted the free bag of Mowam I've received today in the post. I'll tell you about that later. And then obviously Chris Harris came along. He got that nasty face injury where he suffered several small fractures. I don't think it's maybe not kicking on, so it's just outside sources and influences affect his ability to do that.
Was it after that Six Nations? Because I think he'd signed at Glasgow. He'd finished the Currie Cup. and then he went to the Six Nations and then came to Glasgow. And I think Cammie's absolutely right. I think it did start to go not downhill, but certainly sideways at that point.
I think that's it. It's just that for me is always the peak. That for me is where Hugh Jones peaked for Scotland, and he may have had good games after that, but I don't. I can think of other games where Finn Russell has had exception. I can think of other classic Finn Russell performances. I mean, that's one of them. It's up there, but you look at the 2019 Calcutta Cups up there as well for Finn Russell. But I can't think after that of any kind of time. It was Hugh Jones. Oh, then he had that other great game for Scotland.
Yeah,
and some people have that. Some players have that, don't they? They have their one great game and then they're not able to get over it.
Darryl Marfo.
Do you know what I always remember about that
game? He did a great game against Australia before, and you were starting to.
He had a good. Darryl Marfo had one good autumn series.
Yeah.
That's not like Hugh Jones. Because Hugh Jones had, the Hugh Jones England performance was just, it was the peak, but we'd been expecting that because he'd been performing at a very, very high level all the way through. Because I remember, like within 5 minutes of the Australia game, we're like, "Who the hell is this guy?" When Finn Russell gets one over the top, it was like, "Oh wow!"
So impressive, wasn't it?
Craig's joined us.
Hey!
Hello, Craig.
You all right?
Good evening, Craig.
Good evening, Craig. Johnny's already talked about how.
Oh, he just couldn't keep it in. He just couldn't keep it in.
Do you your 2 minutes?
Is that about the how dominating Berwick at the weekend? And
I'm not sure dominant. I don't think dominating's a stretch.
The most one-sided 17-15 I've ever played, apparently.
Well, I wasn't there, but from what I've been told, it was one-sided. But no. It was.
Certainly, the analysis on here has been one-sided.
It usually is, John, is it not?
I know. Yeah, you should have heard this earlier on, buddy.
By the way, I'm not talking to you, John. I'm keeping quiet.
I know, you better watch it. Right, Craig, say something to quickly cut you off.
We were talking, Craig. We kind of talked about the things that stand out in our memory from the last 5 years of Scottish rugby. Is there anything kind of particularly stands out for you in the past 5 years?
The lack of proper retirement for Ross Ford.
That's a good one.
I had that in my notes. Yep.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty rubbish. That's not a positive. My goodness, I should really keep it positive. Can
we talk about Ford? Let's talk about Ross Ford, because Ross Ford was, I think he's a big figure for the blog before the podcast started, and then that continued throughout the podcast. I think early doors we came up with the idea that he was consistent. We didn't think he'd ever been less than 6 out of 10 for Scotland ever in our player ratings,
or more,
and then for our 10th year anniversary pod, I did some stats, and I think I worked out that he was more, but it was like 6.5 was his average rating across all the Scotland performances we'd ever given him. But I think we did a whole podcast about whether or not he was one of Scotland's.
Yeah, you did.
Whether or not Ross Ford was one of Scotland's wasted talents, and it was that was it Stuart McInally, Craig, who said when Richard Cockrell came in, he couldn't believe that they'd never had a throwing coach.
That's right.
Yeah.
Edinburgh. Poor bloody Ross Ford. Not only could he not hook, but nobody was teaching him how to throw in.
But remember, he was taught not to hook, and I always remember that conversation I had. And I just it was I just think apart from obviously a lot of people say he's the most capped player in Scotland. Obviously, Donna Kennedy has 111 rather than his 110. But for someone who is the most capped male player within Scotland, for someone, to be turned around and told that for so many people to berate him as a rubbish player, he wouldn't have got 110 caps if he was rubbish. So I think as I say, and you covered it in the pod before anyway. But he is for me, he's a stalwart for Scotland, and he's someone that should be well remembered. Do
you think there's something, Craig? This is a genuine question. This is not a Glasgow Edinburgh question. This is a Scottish rugby question.
Let's not forget that Ross Ford was a Glasgow player He never played for Glasgow, but he did go to Glasgow and
Yeah,
then was
yeah.
instantly transferred to Edinburgh.
Yeah. We tend to do it the other way now, and we make the hookers good. But whatevs.
Good at penalties. Or giving away them.
That's all right. The first choice for Scotland will come from our side. Genuine question. So I think the Ross Ford situation was really interesting because the timing of the retirement and maybe where Edinburgh were as a club, particularly with looking to clear out maybe some of the older players and some of the players that might or might not have been part of a culture that had been indicative in Edinburgh rugby at that time. However, there's also been other players who have retired as Edinburgh players who maybe the send-off hasn't been quite as... Do you just think maybe Edinburgh don't jump up and down and celebrate their players retiring quite as much as, say, other clubs do?
I think they started to, but then I think that they're starting to get a little bit more media savvy. I think Glasgow had the run on them for a long time when it came to social media and being a little bit more out there. You could see a lot more about where Glasgow were going and what Glasgow were doing, whereas Edinburgh tended to be kind of in the background. And when we were being 8th and 9th in the league, there wasn't a lot to shout about. I guess are we talking about Scotland rugby, or are we talking about Scottish rugby as a whole as the high points, Cammy?
Just Scottish rugby as a whole, Craig. I'm quite happy that the whole world of Scottish rugby is our oyster at this point.
So on my side of things, I think my highlight is the resurgence of Edinburgh and the actual side of things where we were a good team in sporadic moments throughout the history of Edinburgh. We've got to finals and we've got to quarterfinals, etc. But as a whole, our league position was fairly mediocre. And actually, with the bringing on of Cockrell and then the Mike Blair, hopefully is going to be years rather than year. I think the resurgence of Edinburgh has been my highlight, just because we're now providing more players to the Scotland team, and we're also, doing a very, very good job of staying at the better end of the league there.
That was a big call, Ian.
Saturday there, and now I'm disappointed.
That was a big call, though, Ian, looking back on it. Scott, the SIU stamping up the cash for Richard Cockrell because he'd left Leicester, but he was too long and potentially, probably up for a job in France of some sort, and you would think that'd be big money. So he wouldn't have come cheap to the SIU, but that's quite a big call looking back at it.
It was bold, but they tried the sort of promoting from within, and it hadn't really worked. And the kind of personality Cockrell is, as we all know how it ended. But he's one of these people who, once he walks in the door, he's going to demand respect. He's going to put boots to asses, as The Rock might say, and get a wee bit extra out of players. And also, let's not forget, he was a very decorated player, and he had done very well at Leicester. He had a specific way of playing which he knew was effective, and he brought that to Edinburgh's play, which made them harder to beat. And then you've got backline talents like Duhan van der Merwe, like Blair Kinghorn, and whatnot. And when Darcy Graham, then it allows you to become a dangerous team.
I wonder, the thing is, John, obviously when Cockrell came in, one of the things we suspected, I think we speculated on the podcast, was that the SIU brought him in knowing that if things went bad with Gregor Townsend, there was somebody who they could slot straight in as who's got the potential to be an international coach. And you wonder whether the reason why the SIU were more than happy for him just to go is that was no longer a worry.
I think that's absolutely 100% right, Cammy. I think Richard Cockrell would have been absolutely rubbing his hands at the prospect of a Scottish head coach's position when the era we were talking about there, where maybe Townsend wasn't getting the results in 2019, 2020, when things seemed to be going quite pear-shaped.
When Finn Russell was ticking.
The clock was ticking, 1 minute to tonight, and Finn was having one too many beers. Cockrell would have been looking at that and thinking, yeah, you know what, I think that call's coming. and credit where it's due. Townsend stuck with what he was doing. He has made changes. He's accepted, there was elements that needed to change, and results have improved. And I think Cockrell is a coach that has. I think Cockrell is a coach that's going to suit international rugby really well. And what I mean by that is he's not going to have people around him very often, and he's going to have, almost like he's got a shelf life. He has a 2 to 3 year shelf life where, if you're around him every day for 2 to 3 years, he is going to break you and make you want to batter him. If you extend that out to an international coach, he could have a 6-year career at international level and not have Mauro Itoje want to stab him. So, it's just, I think international rugby will work well for Richard Cockrell. And certainly, I think the RFU, we laughed about it at the time, the idea, let's get Richard Cockrell and Eddie Jones in a room together and let's see how that brains trust works. But
I think to see that now, aren't we?
The succession planning, I think, is actually quite sensible, and I would go as far as to say I think England would be a better team under Richard Cockrell just now than they will be under Eddie Jones.
Can I ask Johnny, John, and Ian? And I'll start with you, Johnny. Craig's talked about Edinburgh's progression, and there's a clear progression, I think, under the life of the podcast for Edinburgh. I don't know that there's a line of progression for Glasgow. I don't know whether it's down or wobbly for the last 5 years.
I think it's had a couple of dips, definitely, but I don't want to sound like I'm deliberately trying to wind Craig up or anything, but
first time in.
It's a lot easier for Edinburgh to go from averaging 8th or 9th to where they are now than it is for Glasgow to stay in the top 3 or 4 teams. Like there's nowhere for us to go really other than as good as Leinster or down. And I don't think as good as Leinster is really that achievable. But we've definitely had some seasons that have been ropier than others. But I don't know if I would be judging Glasgow and Edinburgh by the same yardstick, because Edinburgh, I think, have had periods where they've been as good as Glasgow, and just now they're probably going through a period where they're actually better than Glasgow. But like I say, it's easier to get from mid-table to the top bit than it is to stay at the top bit or even start to be the one who wins it every year.
Yeah, that's fair, John.
Do you know? Yes, I do. And actually, my gut reaction to that question, Cammy, was have Glasgow went backwards in the last 5 years? And I would have happily said they have ran backwards. They have accelerated backwards faster than referees marching us backwards at penalties. But
they're knackered running up the Travelator in Gladiators.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Glasgow basically practiced running backwards up the Travelator. But actually, when you think about it, right, so 2017, 2018, Glasgow were unbeaten under Dave Rennie and then lost the playoff to the Scarlets. 2019, we made the final. I think, again, it's funny, there's a theme coming in here. 2019 for me was apparently the year Scottish rugby just flipped on its head, because I think Glasgow have went back a massive amount since 2019. I think we've recruited but this year is a positive. I think we've recruited across the board really badly. And we all know my view on the coaching setup, so I'm not going to go there again. But I think we've just recruited, we've got the wrong people in the wrong jobs, and we have the wrong personnel. We have an aging squad. We're relying on leaders who are no longer leaders. Prior to 2019, we had a team that was exciting, and we had continued almost the Townsend legacy through. But I agree with Johnny's point that it's harder to judge when you're going directions like that. It's harder to judge a team that's been in a final 2 years ago and is no longer maybe performing quite at that and is in transition from that against a team that were finishing 10th, 11th in the table, and Cockrell came in and made them a very, very good side. So it is that you have to compare them differently.
Yeah. The other, I'm conscious of time, and we're getting towards the end of the podcast. I want to talk very briefly about kind of we've talked about on the podcast the last few weeks. I think it's important to kind of notice the kind of progression of women's rugby in Scotland. I think over the last 5 years, because we probably, if we're honest, we didn't give it much attention. I think in the early days of the podcast, then we kind of tried, but I think John, because you kind of, I think were you on from episode 2 with me?
Yeah, so I'm so it was yourself. I think episode 1 was yourself, Rory, and possibly Brody.
Brody and Gav. I think there's 4 of us. There's 4 of us for the first one. I think you joined us.
And then we cut it for the bandwidth purposes.
Yeah, to 3. There's 4. Skype. My dial-up internet at the time couldn't cope with.
Yeah, I joined you in episode 2. That's right. Yeah. So,
but I think it was the early days of the podcast. I think if we're honest, we just didn't give it the attention it should have had. I think later on, then we probably struggled to understand what to say about it when they're going out there and getting beaten on a regular basis. It's kind of hard to analyze that and be fair. Yeah. But I think more recently, performances have improved. I think just the I don't know why it's just been easier to kind of cover it and easier to talk about. And we've tried. I think we've probably having Craig on board's massively helped because Craig's obviously got a lot more knowledge of women's rugby in Scotland than we do. But there's definitely been a progression, not enough, but there has been quite a significant jump in the last 5 years, I would say.
Yeah, I think that's fair, and I think you could probably relate that quite clearly to an improvement in the SRU's output in marketing and certainly the exposure of the women's game globally. Because believe it or not, we are all guys who our primary job is not to go to rugby matches and watch them. We have other things to do. So quite often, some of the analysis we're doing on stuff is we've caught a highlights package or, we've watched the game on catch up. Games on the television, that's a great start. So for me, I think the analysis really improved as we were able to get more access to the games. And obviously, we've had Ian's been along to the women's games for the Six Nations a few times, and those episodes were really great because having him there, he was able to then just giving the insight. And I always remember Ian talking about the Scotland-Wales game and talking about how Scotland were probably the better team overall. They've got the better players, but their scrum got moored. And that was that was the only thing that was wrong, and Scotland lost the match quite comfortably. So, being able to hear someone talking about that, and actually, it gets you thinking, and you start to know the names. You start to see players. There's women's players now that you hear the name, and you can picture 10 highlights from their highlights package that you've seen. So. Yeah, the filming thing for me is a massive part of it, and long may that continue. The more exposed, and it's only going to improve.
Yeah. Have you seen that, Craig? Then that progression in women's rugby the last 5 years.
Yes, and there's a plus and a minus for it overall. The plus point is we're getting far more access to it, and it's been taken far more seriously by a mixture of the public and also the SRU. We've had an explosion over the last 5 years of more women playing rugby and more teams within the club game arriving on the scene, and the clubs are taking it more seriously now. Whereas you used to get the corner bit of the worst pitch to go and train on, whereas now you're getting, they're training with the senior men. They're becoming a senior section rather than the senior men and the senior women. So clubs are now pushing it far. Are now more. They have accepted it. They've equalised their outlook on rugby, but on the international stage, I think it's slightly going backwards. Not on Scotland's side, but as women's rugby as a whole, where you find the gap between the haves and the have-nots have increased dramatically. And the issue we have really right at this moment in time is that my concern is that the social media and the TV viewing figures could get to a point where it starts to plateau because of the fact that anyone who's going up against England are looking to be handed handed a fairly big loss. So on my side of things, for in 5 years' time, if we look at the 10th anniversary of the Scottish Rugby podcast, I would really hope to see that we're in a situation where we've addressed the balance of professional women, the professional women's game in Scotland, and at least paying them a decent wage and allowing them to be professional athletes, and then we'll go from there. But yeah, as I say, it's one of the biggest growing sports in the UK. And really, it's been a fantastic success within Scotland and within the club game. We just need to now start pushing the SRU to push it more to the elite level.
Yeah.
News like today, of course, Craig, helps that, because the Women's Six Nations will have a title sponsor for the first time in its history this year.
And again, it's block related.
TikTok. Yeah, so Cammie's favourite social media platform is going to be sponsoring the Women's Six Nations this year. It's going to be sponsored for the next 4 years. It's a 4-year deal, which obviously shows a massive commitment on the part of everyone to just really try and grow this. And I think that, like, I know Rory had commented in our little side chat that we have about it being, it's like a definite millennial grab, but let's see how it works. I think,
but that's the audience. That's like Craig said. That's the audience that are there for the grab, right? You're going to have if the older heads and more, established rugby fans and older people in rugby. If they're a fan of women's rugby in Scotland, they're already a fan of. You're not going to change the hearts and minds of people who are either for whatever reason already against it because they're massive misogynists, or who just aren't interested. The way in is to bring in a new audience, and it's going to be people who aren't already interested in rugby. I think I think the women players, when you kind of hear their interviews, a lot of them haven't come from rugby backgrounds. I mean, I remember we had Rona Lloyd on the podcast early doors, talking to Rona Lloyd, and she was at a school in Tynecastle. I think Bruce Aitchison was a teacher at one point, so I think he would have got her in. But it was because of women's rugby, the professional, well, not professional, but Scotland women's rugby players turned up at a school one day, and she'd never heard of, she'd heard of rugby, but it got her interested, and now she's one of our best players.
Yeah.
And so I can absolutely see that that's the way to go. There's so much we could talk about over the last 5 years of Scottish rugby. We're going to cover some of it probably in the Patreon podcast. We can get on to Mark Dodson or Keith Russell.
If you're interested in women's rugby, if you've heard these discussions, would you like to know more about women's rugby? The final, the Tenants Women's Premiership final, is on at Merseyside this Saturday. 1:30 kick-off. It's Watsonians versus Hillhead Jordan Hill. There will be Scottish internationals on show.
Get yourself
Louise
along,
McMillan, off the top of my head, should be playing for Hillhead Jordan Hill.
Yeah, get yourself along. Thank you, Ian. There's lots we could have covered, though. We didn't get on to Cats at Rave. We didn't get on to Mark Dodson and Keith Russell. So we could have.
I think there's time. I think there's time. On the
Patreon. We'll maybe touch on it in the Patreon podcast. But before we go, though, I think a constant discussion point on this podcast for certainly the last 3 years has been the Exeter Chiefs branding. And today, on the day we're recording the 5th anniversary podcast, they finally announced that they are changing their branding to a Cornish figure. And I know they're from Devon, and now they're probably going to have a whole other Twitter war with Cornwall. But I'm not getting involved. We don't need to get involved. You can't culturally appropriate something. You can't culturally appropriate a Cornish pasty. We're out of the EU now. You can't.
It's not one of those protected foods.
We're out of the EU now. It doesn't count.
Oh,
that's what Brexit.
Well, look what you've done, Nigel.
Arbroath and all that. So
yeah. So, but yeah, they finally changed today, and I just, we've said it on Twitter already, but just, I think, and we've said it on the podcast before, but the fans from Exeter who've worked really hard and in the face of some quite horrific abuse and harassment from their own fans, and have very quietly in a dignified way got this through. Full credit to them, and I really hope that they're able to kind of, fall back in love with the club again.
There is.
I was there.
Oh, on you go, Johnny.
Sorry, John. I was there at Sandy Park to watch Warriors at the end of 2019, and it was great. Like, lovely city, really nice fans. The majority of their fans, really, really nice, made us really welcome. Are in almost every other way, Exeter are a big success story of a club, apart from this one massive black cloud, which is finally disappearing. And I think it's going to be really nice to have Exeter now as a club that you can kind of look up to, because everything else they've done has been incredible. Like the way they've got to where they are, winning premierships and European Cups and things from where they were, is fantastic. All their fans were so welcoming. The majority of them have been on board with the branding change for a couple of years now. And I'm really, really chuffed for Chiefs for Change, because they've done a power of work. And, like Cammy says, people have been so horrible to them, and they were dignified through the whole thing. But the majority of the Exeter fan base, I think, should be really happy. And I had a great time down there. So
I think the one really positive thing that's come out of all this is we've all learned a lot. And I think particularly the journey that rugby has made to communities that don't traditionally play it. I mean, we wouldn't have got to know what Iroquois' roots. Yeah. We wouldn't have got to have those kind of connections forged with those communities, across the ocean. And I think that's really good. And I think those relationships will continue. Exeter Chiefs for Change have laid a lot of connections over in the States, and it's really encouraging to see Blood and Mud sponsor a team over there. They've got their sponsorship on their shorts, which is fantastic. Yeah. So all these connections have got all these really positive, good things have actually come out of something bad. So it's there's a lot of positives come out of it. I would say I was speaking to somebody from Exeter today who was doing some training at work, and he said, "Oh, what do you know about Exeter?" And I said, "Oh, actually." I told him, and he said, "Oh, yeah." He said, "I was so," and we were talking to a group of people. Said, "I was really pleased when they got rid of the Big Chief," and everybody in the room weren't rugby fans. They were, "Oh my god, they were doing that." And we're like, "Yeah." And then when he said, "Yeah," and they got rid of the Big Chief mascot, I went, "Oh well, at least they did that." I said, "Oh no." Then they brought in a third, and they called him Tom O'Hawk, and they're like, "Oh my god." And they're going, "Was this like a couple of years ago?" No, this was literally 6 months ago.
I had this conversation last night with a non-rugby fan, and the incredulous sort of like, they did what? Really?
It was lovely to all these people who then were kind of like rolling their eyes, going, "Oh, typical rugby," kind of, it's the kind of thing we'd expect. It was nice to go in after lunch and say, "Actually, we were talking about this morning. By happenstance, they've changed the branding." Nice to see.
Can we just address the elephant in the room, though? Tony Rowe clearly listens to the podcast.
Yeah, there we go.
Obviously.
Because I think what's happened here is Tony Rowe knows it's our birthday and has clearly been following your socials, Cam, and knows that we delayed it from last night, obviously, and said, "You know what? I am going to release on that day." Because then those boys, basically, it's like getting married on someone's birthday. It's really,
do you know what it is, John? It wasn't that at all.
On someone's wedding day.
It was the Glasgow game where I sent the Exeter social media group repeated videos of bagpipes because they banned the bagpipes, and I replied.
That
to
was
every
honestly
tweet.
some of your best work recently.
I know.
I enjoyed that a lot.
I'd like to
There's
think
a lot
that
of commitment to that.
I know. I'd like to think the sheer thought of me sending them more bagpipe videos made them crack. So Tony, we can't cope with this anymore. This man sending us the same clip of someone playing Flower of Scotland on a bagpipe.
There's a madman sending bagpipes, and there's Glasgow fans in the crowd shouting, telling us what we are, and the stewards, they don't agree.
Have any of you watched the 8-minute video he's done yet? I haven't.
There's not a picture of Hoggy in there at all. I'm just so disappointed.
Is there yellow circles though?
It's as if he's leaving or something. No.
If he doesn't turn up for the Scotland camp, we know he's probably buried under that bloody business park that Tony was trying to build outside Exeter.
Is that what he is?
Yeah. This is where Hoggy Lane is going to be.
The one that we bought the middle ground and called it Centre Parks.
Look, before we get on to things that are getting laid in Exeter, let's just move on.
Oh,
boom, boom.
To the Patreon podcast.
Bravo.
So we will say farewell to our normal listeners this week. Thank you very much
Yeah,
for
mate.
all the listening that you've done and all the support to everybody over the last 5 years. We're very grateful to you. And we love our patrons. We also love our regular listeners as well. So you're a big part of what makes us enjoy doing the podcast. We'll be back next week. We'll have a Six Nations preview next week. As we lead into the Calcutta Cup, it's getting exciting now. We're going to have our big Doddy Aid finale, where Johnny's going to reveal how we're all doing. We're not going to say anything tonight. What I will say is apparently John is beating us all, which John thinks is a big thing, given that some of us aren't even trying and are just recording the walk to school and back.
Look,
well done, John.
McGinty is clearly like he drinks protein shakes on the podcast. So the fact that let's be clear, Cammy, Johnny, and Craig combined, admittedly, are less than a mile behind me, but there is 3 of them.
Right, John, I logged a mile the other day because my daughter went to football and I watched her. I was like, she's part of this. She can have a mile. Stuck a mile down.
I've just been logging my kilometres from tonight and from walking the dogs and everything just to the night, just to.
Johnny,
well,
sometimes I think we're the only people taking this.
I know.
seriously.
I know. I can't believe he stood on the sideline and he's logging that. The pair of them.
Shocking.
He
Anyway.
attached it to his daughter.
Anyway, that's it from us for this week. We'll be back next week. If you're watching live on the Patreon stream, hang around and we'll be back very shortly. But for the moment, it's goodbye from me and goodbye from Johnny, John, Craig, and Ian.
Bye.
Cheerio,
Right.
Hey-oh.